It's very common to do post-processing on your textures after you've generated them from something like Mari, or in this case in ZBrush. Normally you do this using Photoshop. And Photoshop is mostly perfectly fine. The problem is when we have something like a UDIM, let's say. So we have now 6 texture maps. And let's say we want to do a color change to all of them. We want to make them all brighter, darker, blur them and all that. But doing that in Photoshop, you have to bring it in. You have to blur each and every single texture map. That's a problem. Might be fine for 2 maps, but if you're dealing with 50, you just can't do it. You're going to have to like make a script for it in Photoshop, and it's really cumbersome and it's very destructive. This is where a compositing program like Nuke comes into play. You can also use Fusion. Fusion is a competitor to Nuke, owned by Blackmagic, and it's completely free, which is a huge advantage as Nuke is rather expensive. I'm using a non-commercial version of Nuke here, which has a big restriction to this workflow, which is you can only render out full HD as the highest resolution. You can still work with everything, so this tutorial here is valid, but you can't actually render it out from Nuke. With that said, let's explore what we can do here. If we are in a node graph, you can hit the R key, and R just creates a read node. So I'm just going to find my files and just copy them in here. I'm just going to take the AO, CDISP, and color map. So now you get 3 nodes here. I'll assume you're somehow familiar with Nuke. This is not an introduction to Nuke, this is just showing the workflow. The first thing I do is I switch the interface to something more pleasant. This is kind of hard to work with. So I hit Shift and F3 and I get this nice view up. In order to see our stuff here, you have to hit just the 1 key or 2 key and you create viewers. So just hit 1 and you get up a viewer here. So let's say you want to, so we have the entire, all the 3 UDIMs for the face in this one here. So let's say we want to blur all of them. As I said, in Photoshop, this is a bit of a pain in the ass to do. But in Nuke, you just select the node, you hit the B key, and now you can just blur it. So now you can see it's being blurred. And remember how I said you want to have a bleed on your texture? This is the bleed. You see these 16 pixels here? This means if I blur this, if you don't have the bleed, you can see that the black area here would bleed into the texture map, and you would with 100% certainty get seam issues. So now we can blur it a fair bit. We can probably blur it about, well, maybe 16 pixels, as that's the edge of the bleed, without any problems. If you take your textures from Mari, you have an even further bleed, which is really nice. So if we just scrub through a timeline here now, we can see that everything is being blurred. This is extremely handy, because oftentimes you find that you just have to do color corrections to your textures. So this is not a tutorial, or this video here is not directly related to our tutorial series. This is not the workflow between Modo and ZBrush. This is just a bit of a bonus video for you, because I figured this is very useful. So one thing I do a lot is I take my CDISP and I overlay it on top of my color. So select the CDISP first, then select the color, hit the M key. So now the CDISP is going to be on top of my color. So if we change this to overlay, it's a bit aggressive. All right, so what's happening here is it's doing exactly what we want to do. But the problem is, as our CDISP is made completely black, it can't really do anything here. Which brings us up to a point which I actually want to bring up as well. If you hit the G key, you get up the grade node. The grade node is awesome because you can offset it. So if you hit 0.5, it's going to be offset now. So now the mid value for the displacement map is 0.5. So now it's going to work fine. But the problem is there is nothing going on here because the contrast is so low. You can see maybe a little bit, but it's so low contrast. So in order to bring out the CDISP or the displacement map, we need to use a node called roll of contrast. I set this to something like 30. So now we can actually see the displacement here in its true form. So this is what my displacement from ZBrush looks like. You can see it's a very nice and clean displacement here. compared to this, where you can't see it. And also the advantage of Nuke here is that it's a non-destructive process. So I can keep going back to this and change this on the fly at any point. Nothing here is baked into the displacement. So now if you overlay it on top, which is working perfectly, you can see that we get more details into the color map. This may be something you want. I prefer to not have too much baked into the color map, as I like to have this be done by actual good shapes in my displacement instead. Actually in Modo at render time. But this can be really nice for just faking something like this. And you can do the exact same thing in Photoshop. This is just a little pro tip for you, because Nuke is amazingly powerful for this. Because it's simply non-destructive. And non-destructiveness is something we really need when working with texture maps. And this is propagating through to all the various UDIMs as well, because this is just going on an image sequence. So the hair has a benefit from this. So you can see we get really nice texture for the hair, which is overlaying the displacement on top here. And also, remember how I said it was a huge advantage to name your files in a logical manner. So this is not called head color and throat color and so on. This is just called color, col1, and then just UDIMs. The reason I do this, or one of the reasons, is because this will read as an image sequence now. So you can bring this into pretty much any image sequence editor, such as After Effects or Nuke or Fusion. And you can just do huge edits to all of them. This is, as I said before, this is extremely useful. Let's say you have 60 UDIMs, which I've done a lot. You have 60 UDIMs, 60 texture paths, 60 texture files, and you have to just make all of them brighter in one go. It takes like 5 minutes to fix all of it if you're using Nuke. It would take ages to do in Photoshop. So this is more of a quick tip for you than anything else. I just want to introduce you to the magic of Nuke, that you can actually use something like Nuke in Photoshop when texturing, and not just, it's not just a trivial little thing. You can actually really save your ass in a production.